For some time now, I have been contemplating the mystery at the heart of alchemy. That is the transmutation of lead into gold. For the alchemists, lead is ruled by the planet Saturn, and gold is ruled by the planet of the sun. And the therefore, lead is the mineral equivalent in the earth of a Saturnine influence, and gold is the mineral equivalent in the earth of a solar influence. The alchemists also considered that as it is above in the microcosm of the heavens and the earth, so it is below in the microcosm of the human being. And they were keenly aware of not only the correspondences that obtain between earth and heaven, but the correspondences that obtain between the broader macrocosm, the large world, the great world, and the little world of the human being. And so I've been thinking a lot about this, about what Saturnine influence might mean, and what solar influence might mean. One immediate reflection is that um, twice in my life I have had periods of deep depression. And what we call depression today, the alchemists would have called melancholy, a melancholy spirit. And a melancholy spirit is really the an excessive influence of Saturn. The soul has become lead-like in depression. The qualities of Saturn are cold and dry, and Saturn is also associated with deep thought. And it just strikes me, and I appreciate this is anecdotal to some degree, that my experiences of depression were typified by an excess of thought, an excess of deep thought, rumination on death, on time, on the finitude of time. And the finitude of time is, existentially speaking, death. That's just another way of saying the same thing. And so there's this death thing, there's this aspect of the finitude of time. There's also this deep thought and this coldness, this fundamental withdrawal of any heat or zest for life or energy for life or enthusiasm for it, in my experiences of depression anyway. And so it strikes me that depression is a Saturnine mood, a melancholy mood. And on the point of death and time, Saturn, another name for Saturn is Kronos, from the Greek myths. And Kronos is Father Time. The sphere of Saturn itself, the outermost of the spheres and the highest, is a Time Lord, basically. And so is connected to the finitude of time too. So the image we have of the Grim Reaper and of Father Time and such like this, or the old man Saturn with his scythe. All of this is Saturnine imagery, basically. There's something too about a withdrawal in to deep thought, a withdrawal of energies into the deep interior in this Saturnine mood of depression. Okay, so that's Saturn. That's the leaden state of the soul, which the alchemists knew and recognized, and they rejoiced when Saturn appeared, the lead-like stone appeared, because this signified for the alchemists the first phase of the work, the the first movement towards the attainment of the philosopher's stone and the great transmutation. Okay, like what's the other principle here? Well, Saturn is, as I've said, associated with lead and gold. So the beginning of the work is lead, is Saturn. That is where the alchemist's work begins. Where does it end? What is its goal? Its end and its goal is gold. Gold is the solar metal. And as far as I can see, it seems to be the complete opposite of uh, gold seems to be the opposite of lead, and the sun the opposite of Saturn. Why? Well, the sun, of course, has a warm energy. And so we thought about how Saturn, the outermost planet, the furthest away planet, the one that stands on the edge of all of the seven spheres, Saturn is the coldest, okay, and the most pensive. The sun, by contrast, is an ebullient and energized source of light and life. Principally light, of course, and heat. It is the fiery planet. And we have, in contrast to the Saturnine falling in towards the center and dwelling deeply and intensely upon the outermost shell of our existence. The finitude of our existence in time, death, is like a dwelling upon the outermost shell of what we are as human beings. And so this Saturnine melancholy is associated too with the outermost. Okay, gold. What's gold? Gold, well, the sun. Okay, so the sun is a fiery light and heat. And the point in terms of the human being with heat and light, well, heat, firstly, so the heart is the sun within us. That's the heart is the solar principle within the human being. And when the heart beats and when the heart is active, when we're moving and going about our days, blood, of course, flows out around, circulates all around. And this is the waking state. The waking state is obviously ruled by the sun, uh, because we are creatures that are awake during the day and asleep at night. Simple thing to say, but it's the case for human beings. And so there is this close affinity, you see, between waking, consciousness, activity, light, heat, and the heart when it is active and the fire within us is lit, then there is this outflowing energy, this outgoing energy. Jung in his conception of the introverted and the extroverted type, has something of this Saturnine solar aspect with it, the extroverted type being that outgoing type, and the introverted type being that indwelling type. Um, so the sun, so light, so the sun lights all of the other of the heavenly bodies. It is the most brilliant and illuminating of the heavenly spheres. And this is a principle, a native principle within the human being too, on the alchemical vision, is that there is a light within you as well. And that light is the the inner human being, the soul, um, the innermost interior of you. And so Jung would talk about this in terms of the psyche, which is the Greek word for soul. And you could just think of it that the interior principle in things, but in, let's say, in human beings, the inner is that solar aspect. The interior is that solar aspect. And the central interior too. So you get this idea now about the human being having like these two aspects, this outermost aspect, which you could associate with the body, because really the body is the outermost aspect of the human being, and which we could associate it with Saturn and also with the elemental earth, because our body is the stuff of the earth. As it says in Genesis, from dust we are, and to dust we shall return. Um, so there's this like yeah, earth-like outer dimension of our being, without doubt. But the opposite of that outermost is the innermost. And the innermost is the source of heat and light. Okay, so I was going to say heat as well. So heat is like energy. And like when they say like someone's got passion or enthusiasm or is fired by the spirit, yeah, this is all heat. This is all um like awakeness to life itself. And that is closely connected to the cycle of the sun, even literally. I'm reading the Renaissance physician Marsilio Ficino, who was the physician to the Medici family in Renaissance Florence, and he recommends, it's a common thing we hear these days, but he recommends waking with the sun. And this is the basis of his natural magic, because waking with the sun is to put yourself in harmony with the great heat and light in the macrocosm, and then the great heat and light of the microcosm of the human being is it overflows exuberantly in the same sort of harmony. In general, you could say that the waking state is a sun-like state for the human being, because the heart is more active and the blood is flowing through the entire body. And by contrast, in sleep, we fall into our center. The words for this are the centrifugal force of waking solar consciousness. Centrifugal means fleeing the center, running from the center out into wakefulness. And centripetal means falling in towards the center. And so when we fall asleep, of course, we fall into the center which is what Earth as an element does. Um, what is Earth like? What is heavy? What is heavy? What is heavy and dense, you see, falls towards the center. What is fiery and subtle rises to the heavens. So there's an elemental dimension to this too, fire and earth. And so there's like a fire-like aspect to our waking life and a earth-like aspect to our slumber at night. Um, I think I've covered most of the thoughts. I mean, it's something I've been considering for a long time. Like, like if that is the central mystery of alchemy, the transmutation of lead into gold, then what is lead and what is gold? And associated with these metals, it turns out, in the occult philosophy, are the planets and the distinctive qualities associated with those planets. Um, yeah, I think I've sort of, I think I've sort of said it. Yeah, I just sort of wanted to say that like there's a way of thinking about the mind and the body, like the mind-body problem in philosophy, like the body being the outermost shell of the human being, ruled by Saturn and associated with the element of the earth, and the soul being the innermost aspect of the human being, ruled by the sun and associated with the soul. Indeed, the alchemists believe that like the imagination is the star within the human being. I think that was Gerhard Dorn, the early early modern alchemist of the early 17th century. I remember Jung quotes him saying as much, that the imagination is like a star within us. It's like this luminary light function. And this, of course, runs back through the entirety of the Western tradition, really. Like the divine is likened unto light, unto a supreme light, and the intellectual nature of man, the noetic nature of the human being, the mind-like aspect is like a light. Plato famously gives the analogy of the sun to elucidate his notion of the form of the good and the relationship of the mind to that form. So that's just to say it's a rather ancient notion, that the essence of the human being is like a fire, like a light, and like a heat. Um, the light of the mind and the heat of energy and passion and enthusiasm, etc. And it is just that heat that, to me, again, it's anecdotal, I appreciate. To me, it's that heat that sort of dies in depression. Depression is very cold in that sense. Um, Meaning seems to have gone. Um, there is no ultimate sense to things. There is a kind of pervasive nihilism, a difficulty seeing any real meaning in anything. And the more I've thought about it, like this seems to me like a sort of like shutting down of the like a smothering of the fire and the light of imagination in the human soul. Um, and a reflection and like a dwelling. It's called I think it's called depressive rumination clinically, a ruminating upon death and time and finitude, and this outer shell, making that the sole sort of focus of the mind. And it's just to like say that like Saturn is one of the seven planets. And here I've given quite a negative view of Saturn. And I must confess that probably has to do with the house under which I was born. Um, because my detriment is Saturn and my native principle is the sun. So like I'm sure there's some kind of bias coming in the way of framed these things. But I don't know, there's some intuitions that have sort of impressed themselves upon me and become very salient for me as I've continued to reflect upon alchemy. And so there seems to be at the heart of the whole thing a transmutation of consciousness, a transformation of the state of the soul from a state of the soul in this melancholic spirit, this depressive spirit, this spirit that is cold and bereft of all life and heat and light, utterly cold and utterly focused on the most superficial, smallest, and almost nothing of things, to the opposite, to the dawning of that inner sun of which the alchemists speak, the gold that is our native essence as human beings, which can become obscured or hidden under the Saturnine dross. And the alchemical fire serves to burn off that dross and reveal the glory and the radiance and the ebullience and the plenitude of that light and that heat within us. So that's a reflection upon turning lead into gold and Saturn and the sun as it relates to the human being. Thanks for listening.